We spend a lot of time analyzing the latest tech drops, the VR headsets, the AI wearables, the phones that cost, well, as much as a mortgage payment.
Right.
But sometimes, to understand where we're going, you have to look at the machine that really started the fire. And I'm not talking about some mainframe in a university basement.
No.
I'm talking about a beige bread box that hummed, took 30 minutes to load a game from a cassette tape, and arguably created the concept of the digital native. I'm talking about the Commodore 64.
And this isn't just a history lesson.
Not at all, because as of last year, 2025, the C64 is technically a current-gen console again.
It's wild, isn't it? The brand released the Commodore 64 Ultimate just a few months ago. And looking at the sales figures in our source material, it's not just 40-somethings buying them for nostalgia. It's a real revival.
It is.
But you're right. The original 1982 launch, that is the pivot point. That was the moment the computer went from being this scary sci-fi industrial thing to something you plugged into the living room TV.
Right next to the VCR. And that transition is what we need to unpack. Because on paper, the C64 shouldn't have won. I mean, in 1982, the market was crowded. You had Apple, Atari, Texas Instruments.
Everyone was in the game.
But Commodore came out swinging with a strategy that feels incredibly aggressive even today. And it all started with the price. The sources highlight that it launched at about $595.
Which isn't nothing adjusted for inflation.
No. But compared to an Apple II, which was well over $1,000, it was a steal. It was about the price of a decent color TV. How did they even pull that off? Were they just taking a loss?
No, and this is the killer business insight from the era that people often miss. They weren't losing money, they were ruthless. It comes down to one phrase: vertical integration.
They owned MOS technology.
Exactly. They bought the chip foundry.
Right.
So while Atari had to pay a markup for every processor and every memory chip, Commodore was essentially buying from itself at cost.
So the CEO, Jack Tramiel, he had this famous line, right? Business is war.
That was his entire philosophy. He could drop the price of the C64 to levels that literally bankrupted competitors. Texas Instruments had to pull out of the home computer market entirely. They just couldn't compete.
It's the Walmart strategy, but for high tech in the 80s. But, cheap computer is just a doorstop if it doesn't do anything. And this is where the 64 and Commodore 64 becomes so important.
64 kilobytes of RAM.
To a modern listener, that sounds like a rounding error. My smartwatch probably uses more than that just to show the time.
But in 1982, 64K was mass. It was massive. It was luxury. Most competitors were running on 16K, maybe 32K if you were lucky.
But it wasn't just the memory, it was the custom chips. We have to talk about the two chips that gave this machine its soul. The VSE2 for graphics, and more importantly, the SID chip for sound.
The SID chip.
I feel like that chip has a bigger fan base than some rock bands.
It absolutely deserves it. I mean, before the SID chip, home computers just made simple boops and boops, maybe a square wave. The SID, the sound interface device, was a legitimate three-way synthesizer built right into the motherboard.
It had filters, different waveforms.
Sawtooth, triangle, modulation, everything. It meant that game soundtracks weren't just functional noise, they were actual compositions. It created a whole genre of music.
Which explains the C64 playlists all over Spotify today. But okay, let's talk graphics.
Yeah.
The VC2. This is what allowed for those multicolor sprites, the little moving characters on the screen.
Right. It had a palette of 16 colors. That sounds so limited now, but compared to the monochrome green screens of business computers, it was vibrant. It made the machine feel less like a calculator and more like an arcade cabinet.
And that visual appeal is what got it into the living room.
But the Trojan horse aspect was the keyboard.
The classic it's for homework argument.
The ultimate parental justification. Sure, it plays games, but look, it has a keyboard. Junior can learn BASIC. And because it plugged into the family TV, it became the center of the household in a way a PC in a home office just never could.
But the C64's dominance wasn't uniform across the globe. We tend to have this very US-centric view, but the source material shows some brutal regional battles. In the UK and Europe, Commodore ran into a brick wall named Sinclair.
Sir Clive Sinclair. And the ZX Spectrum, yeah, this is a massive part of 80s computing history. In the UK, the Spectrum was king. And the reason was simple. It was even cheaper than the Commodore.
But you kind of got what you paid for, right?
Yeah.
I've seen pictures. The keys on the Spectrum,
yeah,
they call them dead flesh.
Rubber keys is the polite term. It was a membrane keyboard, very squishy, very small. But that price difference was undeniable for a British family in a recession. It created this incredible, distinct culture of bedroom coders in the UK.
So how did Commodore fight back? If Sinclair is cheaper, why buy a C64?
They marketed it as the premium option. So if the Spectrum was the budget compact car, the C64 was the American muscle car. It had a proper typewriter-style keyboard, joystick ports were standard, and it had that amazing sound. It just felt more robust.
You saw a playground divide then. Spectrum kids versus Commodore kids.
Oh, absolutely. It was like Xbox versus PlayStation today, but with much more arguing about tape loading times.
And that awful screeching sound.
Exactly. But eventually, the C64 won out on longevity because the hardware was just more capable.
Now, here's where the outline surprised me. I knew about Sinclair. I did not know much about the Asian market. The notes mention a battle against the MX series in Japan and South Korea. This feels like a completely different dynamic.
It really is. In the West, the home computer was marketed as edutainment, a mix of fun and learning. But in parts of Asia, with the education fever in South Korea and Japan's academic standards, the computer was seen mainly as a tool for literacy, for calculation.
And that's where the MX series comes in.
Right. These were locally produced machines like the MX80. They were workhorses. They didn't have fancy graphics or synthesizer chips, often monochrome screens. But they were reliable, cheap, and this is crucial. They had excellent support for local character sets built right into the ROM.
That's a huge advantage. Kanji, Hangul, the C64 was built for English.
Very Western-centric. But the bigger friction was cultural. The C64 was almost too fun. In a strict academic environment, a computer that played incredible games with loud music, well, it was viewed with suspicion. The MX looked like school supplies. The C64 looked like a toy.
The eat your vegetables computer.
And the C64 was the dessert computer. But here's the twist. Eventually, the C64 found its niche there, too, because of that versatility. You can only type for so long. Eventually, you want to play. And when students saw what a C64 could do, the desire shifted.
So it became the aspirational machine.
Exactly. It was the generalist victory. It wasn't the best at text. It wasn't the cheapest, but it was the best all-rounder. Which brings us to what you actually did on these things, the software.
Right, the software explosion. Let's talk about the technical wizardry here. You mentioned 64 KDB of RAM. Some of these games were huge. The notes point to Elite as the classic example.
Elite is a miracle. It's a 3D space trading simulator with thousands of planets, an economy, space combat. Fitting that into 64 kilobytes is, well, it's mathematically impossible if you store everything individually.
So how did they do it?
Procedural generation. This is a concept that powers modern games like No Man's Sky. But it was pioneered here out of necessity. Instead of storing the map, they stored the math.
The algorithm.
Yes, a Fibonacci sequence based on a seed number that would generate the entire universe on the fly. The computer built the galaxy every single time you turned it on.
That is just so elegant. It's efficiency born from limitation. But for most of us, getting software wasn't about algorithms. It was about magazines. And this is a part of the experience we've completely lost.
The type-in era.
Compute. Gazette. Run magazine. You'd buy a paper magazine, and in the back, there were just pages and pages of dense code.
And you had to type it all in. Manually. Character by character.
And if you missed a single comma.
Syntax error. Program crashes. You'd spend 4 hours typing in a game called Worm Hunt, run it, get an error, and then spend another 2 hours debugging your own typing.
It sounds like torture, but the sources argue this was actually the secret sauce.
It was accidental education. You weren't trying to learn to code, you just wanted to play the game. But to do that, you had to interact with the code. You started to see patterns. Oh, PUKey 532A00, that turns the border black. You learn the machine's language by osmosis?
It creates a totally different relationship with the technology.
You're an owner, not just a user. You've been under the hood. And that owner mentality is exactly what kept the community alive for 40 years, leading right up to the revival.
So let's fast forward. It's 2025, 2026. The Commodore 64 Ultimate is on the shelves. We've seen mini consoles before, right? The NES Classic, PlayStation Mini. They're usually just emulators in a cute shell.
Yeah, but the notes on the Ultimate suggest this is way more ambitious. It's definitely not a toy. I mean, physically it looks right. The beige case is back, the mechanical keyboard, but the connectivity is all modern.
HDMI out, USB ports.
1080p upscaling so it looks crisp on a big TV. And USB ports instead of cassette decks.
Thank goodness. I don't think I have the patience for tape loading anymore. But what really jumped out at me in the specs is the dual mode functionality.
This is the feature that explains why this new version exists. You can boot it in classic mode, and it's 1982 all over again. Blue screen, blinking cursor, basic.
But then there's a modern mode.
And this allows for a hybrid development environment. They've integrated a JavaScript bridge.
Wait, really? JavaScript?
Yes. This is huge. It means a developer who knows modern web languages can write code in JavaScript that compiles down to interact with the original 8-bit hardware, with the sprites, with the sound chip.
That is a bizarre and brilliant collision of worlds. It's JavaScript controlling a SID chip.
It lowers the barrier to entry completely. You don't have to learn 6502 assembly language, which is incredibly difficult to make a game for the C64 anymore.
And our sources say this has already caused a spike in neo-retro indie games.
Hundreds of new titles released in 2025 alone. People are buying this new hardware to play new games that just look and feel old. Demos, music albums. The Ultimate even connects to Wi-Fi for leaderboards and downloads. It's trying to recreate that old magazine club feel, but on the internet.
So it bridges the gap between, say, the grandfather who remembers peek and poke commands and the teenager who knows JavaScript from a coding boot camp.
That's exactly the demographic we're seeing. It's a multi-generational device. The grandparents want to share their history, and the kids are actually fascinated by the limitations.
The limitations are the hook, aren't they? In a world where Unreal Engine 5 can render photorealistic pores on a face, there's something refreshing about a blocky 16-color sprite.
It forces creativity. When you have infinite processing power, you can get lazy. When you have 64 kilobytes, you have to be clever. You have to use tricks. You have to be an artist.
It's the difference between taking a photo and painting a picture. One captures reality, the other interprets it.
That's a perfect way to put it. And that's why the C64 never really died. The tech became obsolete, but the medium, the pixel art, the chiptune music, the intimacy of the code that remained valid art.
So we have the vertical integration of 1982 that made it cheap, the custom chips that made it sing, the global battles that proved its versatility, and now the 2025 revival that proves its soul. It's a heck of a legacy.
For a beige breadbox, it's the machine that democratized computing. It's hard to overstate that.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought. We've spent this time marveling at how a 40-year-old computer is back on shelves, inspiring new code, connecting generations. It's a survivor. Now look at the tech in your pocket or on your wrist. The planned obsolescence, the locked ecosystems, the cloud dependencies. If the servers go down, the device is basically a brick.
That's a scary thought.
So in the year 2066, 40 years from now, what is the Commodore 64 of our era? Is there a single piece of technology you own today that will still be usable, let alone beloved, enough to warrant a revival then? Or are we just living in a disposable age?
That is the ultimate question.
Something to think about while you wait for your next OS update to install. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Please feel free to click on the link in the description below to discover more podcasts.